What's really tea, y'all? How are y'all doing this fine day, evening, and afternoon?
Whatever time you're listening to this, we're just thankful you were able to spend some time with us.
We just want to welcome you guys to the second episode of our podcast, the Colorism Umbrella. The podcast is meant to teach you all on all things colorism through a very multi-dimensional lens. For those who do not know the voices who are resonating in your ears right now, this is Louise.
And I'm Sirapop.
And we are your fellow Psych of Women classmates. A little bit about us. I'm a Psych major and a junior. One interesting thing about me is that I've lived in 3 continents.
I'm also a psychology major and a junior. One interesting thing about me is that I speak 2 languages, plus I am doing a minor in Spanish.
We are so glad to have you guys back to this podcast, and although we are new to your ears, I'm sure by the end of this, we would have become besties. Particularly for the Black community, colorism can affect us in the school, in the workplace, in our homes, and in our own very community. So, for instance, we may have touched on how colorism can display itself as a young child in school, but one study found that colorism is perpetuated even in higher education, like places like HBCUs and PWIs. And for those who do not know, HBCU stands for Historically Black Colleges, and PWIs is predominantly white institutions. But, back to what I was saying, one study found that colorism is perpetuated in HBCUs, the very place that's meant to cater for Black people in undergraduate and higher education. It's supposed to be a safe space for Black people to learn, but instead they're dealing with these issues. So Mary Beth Gassman and Ufuma Abola found that colorism is very prevalent even in the spaces, and these ideas are very much internalized. And so they found that in leadership and social settings, something like the papered bag test, if you guys are familiar with history, was performed. For me, I do not have a particular experience that I can recall where the paper bag test was performed, but I do know the various do nots of a Black girl trying to navigate a PWI. And so as a dark-skinned girl, I knew not to go to frat parties, because if you were Black and you were going to get in, you were most likely going to be light-skinned. And even I've seen people on TikTok and people I know of their own experiences where, this is true. And so I stayed clear from it and I avoided it at all costs. Because unfortunately, even after people graduated, it kind of still follows you. So studies found that light-skinned Black Americans have 6 months more schooling on average than darker-skinned peers. Let's say you were able to beat those odds and graduate. It's safe to say you're still not in the clear, babes, because Black students are affected post-graduation as well, with those of lighter-skinned most likely finding jobs after graduation than their darker-skinned peers, according to a professor at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, Igor Rabov. And it's clear that these disparities are seen throughout different systems in one person's life, in the workplace is one of them. And if I'm being honest, I don't know if we can touch about the workplace without mentioning the Crown Act. For those who know, y'all know. But the Crown Act is a policy that aids to combat discrimination on hairstyles, particularly Black hairstyles and texture. And several cities have passed it, New York, I think, being one of them. But it's not state law, it's not federal law. And so it still happens in the workplace that if you show up with locks, if you show up with braids, your likelihood of getting, microaggressions, negative connotations attributed to your natural Black hair, it can happen. And this is one experience that I can say I've kind of seen. It's very disheartening, these effects on one's own self-confidence, and you try to assimilate to that standard that we mentioned, that white, male, cis, able-bodied, standard that really does not cater to Black beauty. And so one, in turn, can potentially avoid situations like this very much.
Other disparities that take place in a workplace or in place of employment would pertain to biases, rates in employment, and even difference in treatment. We found that, according to Matthew Harrison, Employers actually show a preference for lighter-skinned black men over their dark-skinned peers, regardless of education and their qualifications. And this can have effects beyond as if lighter-skinned people are attaining jobs. They have also been found to have higher socioeconomic status and actually are paid more as the wage gap is real, but within different identities, it allows for darker-skinned black Americans to be paid on average less than lighter-skinned black Americans. And this is something found in various communities as dark-skinned Mexican and Cuban Americans face higher levels of discrimination in the labor market than their light-skinned counterparts. And clearly having these situations happening throughout one's life in various environments would instill these ideas in one's beliefs one way or another, and unfortunately one can take them on as truth and continue, whether unconsciously or consciously, continue to perpetuate them in the various spaces we shared, and that can very well be. I think one system that pops in my mind, and when I think of other environments that perpetuate these ideas, is a healthcare system which already perpetuates racism, also perpetuates colorism in the fact that studies have found that dark-skinned Asian, Latinx, and Black American girls who experience colorism are linked to having negative and emotional health. And of course, this would be apparent in this population as colorism's effects on one's self-confidence, identity, and self-esteem can clearly affect one's mental health, and mental and emotional health. That was a lot, and I hope you can digest all that. If you need to, take a deep breath and drink some water. We can wait.
So, let's talk about makeup now. Many women wear makeup because of society's beauty standards. A common problem for people of my shade, of darker shade, and Black and POC women can understand is the difficulty of finding the right shade of makeup. The range isn't ranging. Especially for those of darker skin, we found that a study regarding the cosmetic industry is that the availability for darker color foundation is low, and this really affects Black women.
This study is called Black and Beautiful, a content analysis and study of colorism that strives towards inclusivity in the cosmetic industry. In the paper, the author tells us about a very problematic nursery rhyme back in the day. It goes like this: if you're black, stay back. If you're brown, stick around. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're white, you're all right. And I know what you're thinking. Whoa, how did people even come up with that? What were they thinking? Anyway, research has shown that many Black women usually spend twice as much money on makeup because they have to go through a trial and error process to find the correct shade of foundation.
And that's not right.
There are a lot of different shades for quote-unquote fair to moderate skin, but choices decrease as you go towards darker shades. And I'd like to point out a really compelling statistic in the article. In a survey of 5,500 women of color, 80% of them reported, quote, extreme difficulties in finding the right shade of foundation.
Like BFFR. If the majority of customers are not satisfied, like what kind of business are you running?
For real. Anyway, the author of this study conducted an analysis of 49 beauty brands between 2018 and 2019 to see whether they have addressed the colorism issue and provided a greater variety of foundation shades. And of course, the results were not surprising at all. Lighter shades were more available than darker shades. Check this out. The frequencies of the lighter shades were 267, but the darker shades were only 31.
Sheesh, like, that's interesting indeed, but it's not surprising and it's kind of sad.
Mm-hmm. On a better note, the author mentions that the gap in the availability of light and dark shades is shrinking due to the progress of inclusivity, and that's good news. Also, the author notices that darker shades are more available online than in physical department stores. Even though that is great, I definitely think that there must be more choices in stores because I imagine that many customers would want to try on makeup to make sure that it's the right shade. And if you buy online, you risk not getting the right shade since you can't try it out beforehand.
Now, we would like to talk about colorism in schools. I know that many children of color face microaggressions from their classmates.
I'm sorry.
I know that many children of color face microaggressions from their classmates who do not know any better.
And I know that kids can be brutally honest. You know, one time in 5th grade, a kid asked me why my eyes are so small. Like, okay, bro, your glasses, I can see better than you when my eyes were smaller.
I know that's right.
And I have an article here that's about being an African American woman in college. It's called Beauty and Body Image Concerns Among African American College Women. And apart from the usual ignorance about black women's hair, many black women experience colorism from both black and non-black people. For background, the article states that in the US, the beauty standards are pretty white, as in pale skin, blue eyes, and straight blonde hair. African features tend to be seen as, quote, ugly, undesirable, and less feminine.
And I think that's really dumb, because if everyone's beautiful in their own way, like, we shouldn't really change up our appearance to match this beauty standard that's set by society. Like, we should appreciate the diversity in which people present themselves.
Exactly, but it's very hard to change society. The article states research that African American women with lighter skin tones are perceived as more attractive than their darker skin counterparts, and empirical evidence has identified colorism as an aspect of the African American experience that can influence black women's feelings of attractiveness and self-worth, decreasing their overall body image satisfaction.
And that's really sad to hear, because you're not already viewed as beautiful just because of how dark you are. And this experience, although we have mainly been highlighting it being in the black community, unfortunately, many other communities suffer from this issue. So I think it's only right we switch gears for a little bit and talk about colorism in the Asian community.
As an Asian man, I can talk a lot about colorism among Asians.
I take it that you have firsthand experience of colorism?
That is right. Thankfully, in my case, it isn't too bad. But it doesn't mean that colorism is less prevalent in the Asian community, because believe me, there's a lot.
I can imagine. Do you mind sharing some of your stories to our lovely listeners?
Sure. So, okay, to start, I'm from Thailand, born and raised there in the capital, Bangkok, and before I came to the United States in second grade. I like to point out that I am on the lighter side of Thai people. So many Thai people are darker than me. So I'm aware that I have some privilege when I go back to Thailand.
I see.
Yep. And I remember one time my aunt came to visit my parents. She commented on how light-skinned I was and how I looked more handsome than my cousins just because I'm lighter.
Ooh, that's not a good take.
I know. But I don't like her, so whatever. Oh, and when I was in kindergarten, I noticed that I get treated better than my teachers than my darker-skinned classmates. For example, I would get more praise during arts and crafts, even though my creations were like crap. Some of my school friends mentioned that they wished to be lighter, like me, still though, look prettier. And obviously, I was like 4 years old back then, so I didn't think about it that much. But now it sounds really sad to hear.
Yeah, for real. Sometimes you're so immersed and it's normalized in your community, like you don't even understand that that's happening all around you.
And I don't really recall experiencing colorism here. If anything, it's just plain old racism, which is not a good look because we need to be better. It's 2022, and we're still hating on people who look different.
Exactly, like preach.
I have an article here about Asian Americans and their educational level. It's called Colorism and Educational Outcomes of Asian Americans, Evidence from the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health.
This article sounds interesting because for many Asian American families, education, I know, is important.
Yep. It's not even stereotyping because it's honestly so true. Literally, all my Asian friends say that they're being pushed hard by their parents to graduate college and get a good job.
And it'd be like that. Back to the article, though.
Okay. The author tells us that in the United States, Asian Americans who have lighter skin are more likely to graduate from college compared to their darker skin counterparts.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting to see how colorism can affect your education, but also very disheartening to hear.
That's right. Though it is important to note that colorism in Asia does not have its roots in racism, unlike in the Western world. It actually comes from a class divide. So the author states that the wealthy did not have to do outside manual labor, like farmers, ranchers, and construction workers, and thus they spend most of their time indoors and out of the sun. And therefore, if you are tan from being out in the sun all day, you are seen as poor and of lower social class.
Unfortunately, that really does make sense.
Yeah. Back in Thailand, I could really see the class divide. My family was comfortably middle class, and in the neighborhood we lived in, we were all pretty light-skinned. But when we go to the outdoor market, just a few blocks away from my family's house, all the vendors were noticeably a few shades darker than us. And additionally, in schools, almost all of the teachers were light-skinned, but the janitors were much more tanned.
Were dark-skinned individuals treated differently?
I'd say a bit, yeah. Sometimes people don't acknowledge them when they're walking past them, whereas they'll greet their fellow upper middle class peers.
Damn.
Another interesting thing in the article is that it talks about how Japan's obsession with white skin apparently is from centuries ago. In the 8th century, a Japanese proverb says, "White skin makes up for 7 defects of a woman."
Huh? I wonder what these 7 defects are, though.
I don't know either. Sadly, the article doesn't really specify them. But anyway, colorism was reinforced during the colonial era when Europeans influenced their own beauty standards of fair skin. And this led to many Asian people being insecure of how dark they look. So they strive to lighten their skin however they can. And in fact, Eurocentric beauty standards affected women's self-esteem more than men, which is not surprising because society puts the emphasis on women to look beautiful.
Mm-hmm. I know it firsthand.
The author continues that darker-skinned Asian women are made to feel inferior because they will be at a disadvantage in the marriage market. The author conducted a longitudinal study of Asian Americans of various colors and compared their education level. And it was found that for both men and women, darker-skinned individuals were more likely to end their education with just a high school diploma. He also commented that, all in all, lighter complexion among Asian American young adults of both sexes is associated with higher educational attainment. And light-skinned Asian American women are 3 times more likely to have a bachelor's degree than their darker-skinned peers.
Wow, that's a drastic difference. And it's a problem because not a lot of people notice this. I didn't even know that before reading this article, but I learned a lot. It's always good to learn a little bit more about the problems we do have in our society.
Yep, I agree.
Well, although we mainly spent however so minutes mentioning the effects of colorism in different communities, I feel like it's only right we end our podcast, and I'm so sorry, yes, boo, we're ending, that we end this on a lighter note. Not to minimize the issue, but this entire podcast's purpose was to not only give those affected by colorism a space to share their stories, but to be seen, to not feel alone, and to educate people. But our listeners are here to learn, and we want you all to do your part and aid us and other organizations who are doing the wonderful work to combat colorism for minorities and people of color.
Go to our social media where we have all this information at the tips of your fingers, which I might add is very convenient.
Head into the Safari app or your Google app. If you're on the computer, if you're on the phone, just make sure you can search something and hit that search bar for me. And type out Linktree. I'll spell it for you, which is LINKTR. And please click the period on your keyboard and continue to spell EE after that. Spelling out Linktree with a period in between the TR and the EE of tree. And we aren't done. Don't hit send. Please add a slash and continue to type out the Colorism Umbrella. No spaces. And so that is spelled THECOLORISM M. Girl, I spelled it out wrong. UMBRELLA. Y'all know what I'm talking about. And I know that was very long. I mean, I stuttered. But we're now arriving to the moment where you click send. And once you do, you will arrive to our Linktree page where, at your convenience, we have all our episodes posted, as well as our interventions and other resources that we want you to please click on. There will be things linked that would be the Crown Act, where we want you guys to send a letter to your senator and local government to aid in discrimination on black hair, and other resources and organizations and platforms that we want you guys to stay connected with, to educate your friends and yourself on, and to use your voice to spread the word, educate others, and do your part in helping us eradicate this issue by using your voice, your platform, your support, and your power to give those who do not have the voice and uplift the voice that needs to be heard.
And now, if you're hearing this and you've made it this far in our podcast, and we thank you for your time, and we hope that you enjoyed this episode of our podcast.
And please, 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 we hope you take a stand against this issue and use your voices and power to combat colorism. If you're an ally, be an ally. I'm calling out my allies right now. And we hope you listen to this part, to the last part, actually, of our beautiful podcast hosted by members Halini and Subumi. And now, we're signing off.
Thank you, everyone, and until next time.